Chapter 12 The Kids. What was that? Zach asked. When she opened her eyes, he stared at her in disbelief. That was for the show. We're madly in love, remember? Let's not go overboard. If you can kiss me out of the blue on the red carpet, I can kiss you at the table. She probably shouldn't kiss him at all. She could envision herself becoming addicted to his kisses, but he didn't need to know that. He frowned. I think you're taking liberties and you need to remember that we have an agreement. That's all this is. She leaned back in her chair, needing a sip of wine. Right. Got it. She didn't and would continue to push against his boundaries. If he was thrown off balance, he was more likely to make a mistake and reveal something to her. Most likely that would be something that would put him in jail. A little boy appeared next to Zach. He tugged on Zach's sleeve, his face eager, eyes wide. Mr. Wilder. A smile sprung to life on Zach's face. Jeff. He enveloped the boy in a hug. How are you? Good. A group of children gathered around the table, piquing Brandi's curiosity. They were all ages as far as she could tell. How's your mom? Now it made sense. Zach must have dated his mother at some point. She's got a boyfriend and he's pretty cool, Jeff said. Mr. Wilder, check out my new toy, another boy said. Zach gave it a good looking over and handed the toy back to him. Did you put that together all by yourself? My mom had to help me find a few more pieces, he said. A little girl put her head on Zach's arm. These children knew him. Not only had he checked out the charity, he knew the recipients of the money. How could a man with such a good heart be a criminal? Zach gave each one his full attention as they talked. She couldn't stop watching him. His face was animated and he had a smile on it the whole time. His laughter boomed across the room as he threw a little boy over his shoulder. She sipped her champagne and eyed him as this unfolded in front of her. Well, I have news for you guys, Zach finally said. They all stared at him. He pointed at Brandi. This is Miss Marsing and she's important to me. I've asked her to marry me and she's agreed. All of the eyes turned to Brandi. She expected scrutiny, but instead the little girl who was hanging on Zach's arm put her arms around Brandi. She looked over the little girl's head at Zach, who just smiled and winked. Brandi carefully patted the girl's back. She had no experience with children, and they made her uncomfortable because they hadn't adopted the veneer of polite society. When the little girl let go, the rest gave her hugs too. They were so sweet they warmed her to her soul. The little girl tugged on Zach's hand. Come on. He rose and let her lead him away from the table. He glanced back at her and Brandi couldn't help herself. She followed behind a little bit. In the back of the room was a table for the kids and toys and games. Twister, the little girl said. Bryn, I'm not dressed for Twister. Zach nodded his head at the game mat. Neither is Miss Marsing. The look Zach gave Brandi told her he had an alternate use for that mat. Her mouth went dry at the thought of tangling limbs with Zach. She turned away to get her bearings back. She wanted him unsteady, but he was making her that way. Marble game, Bryn, Jeff suggested. She nodded. The kids opened a toy chest and pulled out plastic pieces that Brandi couldn't identify. Zach settled on the floor with the kids. In a few minutes, a track had been placed with twists and turns. Jeff handed Brandi a marble. You try it. Zach nodded at her and she had the sense that she'd passed some test. Where? Jeff pointed to the highest point on the track. She put the marble down and off it went. She clapped as it rolled and looped. A laugh escaped her and when she met Zach's gaze he had a small smile on his face. That was fun. You could help us build another one, Zach said. She looked at her dress then at the floor. I'm not sure I can get down there without ripping this dress. It's just a dress, Zach said. She shook her head. I better not. I'll just watch. One more and then Miss Marsing and I have to go back to our table. The kids let Brandi drop the marble a second time and then Zach stood. They all hugged him again. She couldn't stop staring at him as they walked back to the table. Zach Wilder was a complex man and she'd have to step up her game to get the best of him. Why are you staring at me? Zach asked. You are different than I thought you'd be. You used to have no patience for children. He glanced her way. I was a kid then, Brandi. If you remember, I would play endless games of go fish with you. You didn't enjoy it. You didn't risk an expensive suit to sit on the floor with me. He sipped his scotch. As I said, I was a child. You were 20-something. Why didn't she let this go? At that age, I was only interested in being cool. Playing cards with a young girl wasn't cool. I left that desire behind when I was your age. It makes life less complicated. I imagine it does. She studied him as he stared back at her. If anyone knew they were just in a business arrangement, this would look odd. Everyone thought they were in love. No one would think anything of them holding each other's gazes for so long. You wanted to play that blasted game every time you saw me. I knew you couldn't resist, Brandi said. I liked your attention. I remember. What else do you remember? She said before she could think about how pathetic it sounded. You had braces and frizzy hair. She shrugged. Braces are gone and I learned about hair products. He let out a laugh, then sobered. His gaze never left hers. Plates appeared in front of them and he broke eye contact. If he'd been her lover, that would have been a moment. But he wasn't. Go ahead and eat. I'll be back. Chapter 13. Zach rethinks the bargain. Zach had planned on stepping out of the hotel for a moment. He needed a moment. The way Brandi had looked at him as he played with the children had him curious, and those kisses had him hot and bothered. She was a beautiful lady and she didn't seem to have any idea. It had been obvious to him that she hadn't been around kids before, but she'd been a good sport about it. A slap on the back made Zach pause. Hey Zach, Denny said. Can I buy you a drink? Zach nodded. Denny would be a great person to talk to and confess the whole story to. Sure. At the bar, Denny ordered 2 scotches, which made Zach think of Brandi and how she sipped from his drink, then kissed him with the taste still in her mouth. Denny raised his glass. To the kids. Denny had been in the military before law school, and he was the one who had turned Zach onto this charity. To the kids. Zach put his glass down. You look troubled, Denny said. Zach looked around, but everyone was eating. The bartender was wiping down glasses at the other end of the bar. No one would hear them. I caught Brandi snooping. I told you to be careful of her. Why is she your date tonight? I gave her an ultimatum. Denny punched his shoulder lightly. You dog. Not that kind of ultimatum. Zach straightened. I don't need to force anyone into my bed. Denny laughed. Okay, this still sounds good. Well, if her father is going to send her to spy on me, I'm going to get him back. I'm going to embarrass him as much as I can. I don't get it. Everyone in the building world knows we are rivals. How embarrassing would it be to him if Brandi and I were engaged? You aren't, are you? Denny asked. No, but if she doesn't go along, she goes to jail for corporate espionage. That is interesting. And you're making her put on a display like it's all real. Yes, Zach said. You're diabolical. What's the problem? Zach paused and collected his thoughts. This was complicated, and that's what he'd done his best to avoid. The only woman he loved was his mother. He didn't want to have any feelings beyond that. Things could get messy. Spit it out, Zach. Well, those kisses felt real. Denny stared at Zach, then slugged back the rest of his scotch. Maybe Denny hadn't been the person to talk to about this. He was happily married and in love with his wife. He didn't see emotions as messy. Denny laughed. Real, huh? First off, you can't give away my secret bargain. His lawyer waved his hand. I won't. I want to see how this plays out. I will be popping some popcorn for this show. Zach frowned. You're enjoying this. Tell me more about these real kisses. Zach didn't like the amused look on Denny's face. I'm sorry I said anything to you. Denny sobered. Okay, I'll be serious, but you have to admit this is funny. Zach Wilder with feelings. I don't like them very much. It had to happen at some point. No, it isn't happening. Nothing is happening, Zach said. He refused to let his heart dictate anything. He did everything based on what his head wanted. Feelings never entered into his life. There was no reason to change that. It happens whether you want to or not, Zach. I met Carla when I'd just been dumped by my last girlfriend. Yeah, but that's you. Not me. So what's the problem? You should be able to keep your heart to yourself. But I never felt like that when I kissed anyone else, Zach said. Then don't kiss her. It wasn't that simple. They'd already put on a display, and that would be expected when they were in public. If every kiss felt like that last one, he'd be running for the hills. He just couldn't see himself sending Brandi to jail. He was stuck. Denny laughed again. You look miserable. Don't enjoy this. I can't help it. I've been waiting for some woman to capture your heart. I'm going to enjoy every minute of this. Zach sipped his drink. He still didn't have a solution to his problem. He could figure this out. He ran an empire and had encountered all sorts of problems along the way. He'd found a solution for every one. Why couldn't he do this with Brandi? Incoming, Denny said. Zach glanced in the direction Denny indicated and Kent Marsing was heading his way. Great. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. I'm going to find my lovely wife and eat my dinner, Denny said. Traitor, Zach said under his breath. He turned his back leaning on the bar. Kent sat down next to him. I know what you're up to. Zach didn't answer right away. Let the man stew. What exactly are you talking about? I don't believe this engagement story at all, Kent said. Zach shrugged. I guess you'll believe it when you get the invitation. You haven't known each other long enough, Kent said. I've known your daughter since she was 10. I mean this time. You haven't been in contact. Zach lifted his glass to his lips. Maybe your daughter doesn't tell you everything. A look of doubt crossed Kent's face, but then he shook himself. That's not true. Zach had planted a seed. At least this part of his plan was working out well. If you'll excuse me, I have to get back to my date. Your daughter. Maybe we'll leave early and make it a memorable night. Kent's face went red as he began to choke on his drink. Zach left him at the bar, but he didn't go directly to the table. He still hadn't sorted out how he felt. Was it the novelty of the situation? That had to be it. These weren't real feelings? He was Zachary Wilder, Iceman and real estate magnate. Ask any of his dates. He didn't get his heart involved in anything. Now wasn't any different. That decided, he went back to the table. A styrofoam box sat at his place. A half-eaten chocolate cake occupied a plate in front of Brandi. Had he been gone that long? What's this? He asked. They were clearing and you weren't back to, so I had them wrap up your dinner in case you wanted it later. Zach didn't know what to say. Chapter 14. What's next? Brandi studied Zach's expression, but she couldn't read it. Had she done something wrong? She thought it a nice gesture, but if he didn't want it then he could starve if he wanted. She turned away, refusing to think she'd made the wrong choice. She took a bite of her cake and enjoyed the chocolate dancing across her tongue. It had the right level of bitter and sweet. If Zach didn't want to appreciate her gesture, she didn't care. He sat down in his chair facing her. Thank you. That was thoughtful. I'll eat it later. You're welcome, she said, still not looking at him. How's the cake? Delicious. He picked up his fork and took a bite of it. You're right. He took another stab at it, eating it as if someone would take it from him. Her gaze was drawn to his throat as he swallowed each bite. What was so sexy about a man's throat? What was sexy about Zach's throat? He dropped his fork when his cake was gone. She'd forgotten about hers in her quest to study him. Her ears perked up as a string quartet at one end of the dance floor began to play. Would you like to dance? Zach asked as he wiped his mouth with his napkin. Ah. She imagined Zach pressed against her for a moment. Her mouth went dry at the temptation. Zach rose and held out his hand as if she wasn't going to reject him. When she looked into his face, there was a softness to his gaze that wasn't usually there. What was going on? Okay. She took his hand and he led her to the dance floor. He pressed her against him as he swayed. Brandi wasn't sure what was going on. Had something happened? She'd seen her father speak to Zach briefly. Her father wasn't protective, so he wasn't warning Zach away from her. Something had transpired because this was a different Zach than had left her when the meal was served. His body had heart planes in all the right places. She could imagine that he had a six-pack under that suit. Relax. Brandi. We're in love, remember? She had been holding herself away from him and softened into him as he led her around the dance floor. Wherever his body touched hers, it tingled. She became a blur of emotions. You can dance, Brandi said. Yes. My mother taught me. The warmth in his voice was inescapable when he spoke of his mother. How could a guy be bad when he loved his mother? Confusion reigned inside of her. This Zach wasn't who she'd expected him to be. She wasn't supposed to like the man she was tasked with bringing down. One of the times they turned, she saw her father staring at them. Was it obvious that she had mixed feelings about what was going on? Her father looked at her, giving her a nod of approval, then left the ballroom. Part of her bargain was having no contact with him, but she longed to touch base with him. She was out of her depth with Zach. You are far away, Zach said. I'm right up against you. No, not physically, mentally. Look at me, Brandi. As if her gaze had a mind of its own, it traveled to his face. A small smile played on his lips. Do I amuse you? Yes, in fact you do. That's a good thing, Brandi. The song ended, but Zach didn't let go of her. A new song began and he started moving them again, her body betraying her by following his easily. You aren't so bad on the dance floor. 10 years of ballet. Ah, yes, I remember your father lamenting when you didn't want to do it anymore. I like softball better, she said. A tomboy? He asked. Sort of, she said. He leaned down and whispered in her ear. You are all woman now. His breath wafted across her ear, making her shiver. This man was good. He could probably charm anyone into his bed, but she needed to be on guard. I think I'd like some more champagne. When the song ends. When she sat down, Zach brought her more champagne. His gaze fell on the 3 empty glasses on the table. Are you okay? I'm fine, she said, though she was feeling a little lightheaded. Maybe we should go, he said. Isn't there a silent auction? There isn't this time. She drank down half of the glass and then leaned into Zach. You're a little nicer than I thought you'd be. Did you think me an ogre? Not exactly, but I want to kiss you. He cleared his throat. Let me call the limousine. She smiled. You have the same idea that I do. Let's get out of here. She stood. Then the room spun a little, so she sat back down. Drink some water, Zach said as he pulled out his phone. I don't want water. He handed her a glass from the table. Drink it. She sipped it, then put it down. It doesn't taste as good as champagne. I think you're done, Brandi. She leaned even closer, hovering her lips over his. Then kiss me. He paused for a moment, then did as she asked. It was warm and her body was alive from their contact. She fisted his shirt and pulled him closer. Deepening the kiss, she didn't want it to end. He shouldn't. He was the enemy, but right now he didn't feel that way. Zach broke the kiss. Slow your roll there, Brandi. But we're in love, remember? He laughed. But you're drunk. So. She leaned in for another kiss. Zach obliged. She couldn't believe how well he kissed. She'd never been an overly affectionate person, but she never wanted to stop kissing Zach. The limousine is waiting. Do you need the restroom before we go? She blinked at him. How thoughtful. No. He rose and held out his arm. Hang on to me. She stood and did as he suggested. That was probably good. The last bit of champagne had hit her hard. Don't forget your box. He snagged it. Ready. His expression was unreadable again. She leaned against him as they walked. They passed the kids' table and she waved at them. They waved back. They're up late. Zach chuckled. What? You're now an expert on children? Well, no, she said. She stumbled a little, but Zach held her up. Not too far. Just through the lobby and then out the door. Kiss me and I can make it. He stopped his gaze on her. You are demanding. He brushed her lips, but she wasn't satisfied. She pulled him against her and slid her tongue inside his mouth. He made a sound but didn't stop the kiss. When he did, there was a glaze over his eyes. Was he as affected by her as she was by him? Good to know. Can we continue? He asked. Fine. When they reached the front door, the driver was waiting by the car's back door. Did you have a good night, Mr. Wilder? Yes, but I think Miss Marsing's was better than it should be. Be prepared to pull over at a moment's notice. The driver nodded as he whisked open the door. Zach held her hand as she stepped into the vehicle before settling next to her. Kiss me again, Zach. I think you've had enough kisses for tonight, Brandi. The driver climbed in. Isn't there something we can close between us? Brandi asked. Zach pressed a button, then a shield came up behind the driver. Brandi smiled, then climbed onto Zach's lap. Kiss me now. Chapter 15. Brandi changes her mind. Zach wouldn't kiss her. As much as he wanted to. He liked kissing Brandi more than any woman he'd ever put his lips on, but she was drunk. He couldn't take advantage of her. She'd regret it all in the morning. Brandi. What? I want to kiss you. Well, I don't want to kiss you. That was a lie. He wanted to kiss her, but he had standards. If he was going to go down this road with Brandi and have her end up in his bed, she was going to be sober when it happened. He did not need to trick someone into sex with him. We don't have an audience, so there's no reason to put on a show, Zach pointed out. He was trying to convince himself as much as he was attempting to convince Brandi. Her lips were tasty and she was magnificent. There was no other word to describe her. She'd grown up to be a beautiful, thoughtful woman. How had Kent Marsing accomplished that? He was a man who looked out only for himself. Zach doubted the man had changed much since he'd worked for him. She pouted but climbed off his lap. Maybe I don't really want to kiss you anyway. Her stance made Zach smile. It's nothing personal. Why had he said that? He needed to shut up and get Brandi home to bed, without him in her own bed. He sighed. He'd had no specific expectations for how this night would end. He'd resigned himself not to have sex for these 3 months. He couldn't take a lover and pretend to be engaged. There was no one he trusted enough not to let out his secret. Brandi crossed her arms while she sat on the seat next to him. One kiss, Zach. It won't kill you. Why are you so hellbent on this kiss? She turned her green eyes to him. Because I need to know if it was a fluke. What was a fluke? She waved her hand at him. Never mind. I don't want to kiss you anymore. Brandi, tell me please. She turned her head to him, blinking. No. I'm not telling you. It was the alcohol talking. He should turn away and not engage, but there was something about Brandi that had his attention. Tell me, Brandi. He flashed her a grin that he knew very few women could resist. She shook her head. No. I have to remember what this is all about. What is it all about? A business arrangement so I won't go to jail. He waited, but she didn't reveal anything else. He'd hoped she would tell him why she'd applied for a job with his company. He knew in his soul that she was spying on him. Her father had sent her, but he wanted to hear it from her. Brandi. What? Tell me why you want to kiss me, he asked. To see if it was a fluke. What was a fluke? She groaned. That electric feeling I got when we kissed. So she'd felt it too. He didn't know what to do with that information. He probably shouldn't kiss her because each time they did it was better than the last one. He'd kissed a lot of women, but none had awakened a passion in his body. Then kiss me and we'll see. What was he thinking? The words had come out of him, but he didn't remember deciding to say them. Brandi turned her gaze to him, licking her lips. She was thinking about it from the expression on her face. He waited. They still have a few more minutes before they would reach the penthouse. Some part of him wanted to explore these new feelings. Was he playing with fire? He didn't know, and part of him didn't care either. She was a beautiful and desirable woman, and she'd managed to inspire something in him that he hadn't known existed. He cared about Brandi Marsing. Her feelings mattered to him. He'd never been cold to anyone, but he'd never gotten emotionally involved with any of his lovers. This thing with Brandi was a business arrangement. He was feeling reckless and alive for the first time in his life. Brandi Marsing was inspiring that. Maybe he was in a rut and Brandi could pull him out of it. She must be feeling the same way he was. Brandi moved closer to him. She was going to go through with it, and his heart did a little dance. What if she was feeling something also? They were adults. They could explore this thing between them and move on if it didn't pan out. Wasn't that the best course to take? Let these emotions run their course and then get past them. Seemed logical to him. He wasn't a forever kind of guy, so these feelings would be gone eventually. Knowing that, he could indulge in them for a time. Kiss me, Brandi. She leaned into him and he met her halfway. When their lips touched, the heat of their passion could have set the limousine on fire. He turned into her, his hands pulling her closer. This wasn't a fluke. There was some kind of chemistry between them as Brandi let out a moan. She was feeling it also. What were they going to do now? If he rejected this, whatever this was, it would be a long 3 months with Brandi. If they explored it, indulged what they were feeling, the 3 months could be pleasurable, but their end could be disastrous. Suddenly, Brandi shoved him away. She slid as far from him as she could. She was out of breath, but she wouldn't look at him. I was wrong. His world had tilted and she hadn't felt anything? Wrong. I was wrong. I didn't feel anything, Brandi said, her voice steadier now. Zach studied her. He couldn't read her expression in the darkness of the limousine, but he could feel the vibes coming off of her that she wanted to be left alone. Was he her plaything? Was she slumming with the enemy to rebel against her father? He didn't know what to think about her reaction except that it made him angry. He didn't like being played. You felt nothing? Nothing, Zach. Sorry. I guess there isn't any zing between us. I must have imagined it. He hadn't imagined it. He hadn't imagined her hands clutching his shirt either. Brandi Marsing was lying to him and he didn't know why. What was he going to do with Brandi? His anger rose, but he let it go. She was a little tipsy and he was sure she was lying. Self-preservation? His ego wasn't so fragile that he needed it stroked by her reacting to his kiss. He studied her. She stared out the window. Brandi. What? Look at me. She turned her gaze to him. We won't do it again then, but for show, he said. He could hear her sigh of relief. Even if he was going to miss those kisses, he would abide by her boundaries. He wasn't a monster. Thank you, she said, her voice wobbly. This was going to be a long and frustrating Chapter 16. How hard can it be? Brandi was glad they spent the rest of the trip to the penthouse in silence. Her head was spinning slightly from the champagne. She wasn't a huge drinker and she'd had more than usual this evening. She'd been wrapped up in the glitz of the evening, the fairy tale aspect of it, and she'd lost her head. She'd learned a lot about Zach tonight and she needed time to process it all. The ride up in the elevator was silent, with Zach not looking at her. She was thankful for that as she'd thrown herself at him. That wasn't like her. She usually kept her head about her and didn't do rash things. Hopefully she'd feel better in the morning. Her face went red at the thought of her actions. She just needed to be alone for a while. You should drink some water before you go to bed, Brandi, Zach said when the elevator doors opened. She followed him into the kitchen where he poured her a glass of water. Then he left her there. She was happy for the moments to herself to reflect on what happened this evening. She'd made a fool of herself. That's what had happened. Oh goodness. She left the glass in the sink, then went off to find her room. Zach appeared before her in the hallway, his tie undone. I didn't show you your room. She followed him, and when he was gone, she sat on the bed for a moment. Slipping off the dress, she hung it up in the closet before admiring it one more time. Thoughts of Zach and the children, thoughts of Zach and dancing with her tonight, rolled through her head. As she lay her head on the pillow, she hoped sleep would come quickly. It didn't. She needed a book but didn't want to wander around the house tonight. She would have to find out if Zach had a home office, since he might keep the records of his criminal activities there. She punched her pillow and rolled over for the 30th time and realized her mouth was dry. I guess I might as well get up. She sat up and grabbed her phone. She could read that web novel she'd purchased. Something about a wolf shifter finding his mate. As good as the story was, she couldn't seem to concentrate on it. Brandi wandered to the kitchen to find Zach drinking some water, wearing only pajama bottoms. She paused to stare at him in the light over the sink. His body was as toned and fine as she'd felt through his clothing. She shouldn't ogle, but he looked as if a sculptor had fashioned him. She must have made a noise because Zach turned. Hey! She stepped into the kitchen. Needed some more water. Yeah, I get it, he said. She filled the same glass as before, then drank it. The liquid was clearing her head as she consumed it. The embarrassment from earlier had been washed away too. Zach watched her from the shadows. The foam container from before lay open on the counter. You're eating in the dark? Yeah, it's cold. You could heat it up. Yeah, I guess I could, he said. Turning on the light, he put everything on a plate, then used the microwave. She watched his every move. He was sleek like a panther, moving smoothly through each task without a single hesitation. You want some? He asked when he removed it from the oven. No. It's your dinner. I'll share. Come on. He turned on another light, then settled at a breakfast bar that faced into the kitchen. I have another fork here. She eyed him while he looked at her expectantly. It seemed as if he wanted her to sit down with him. Too bad you didn't snag some chocolate cake. He laughed. I wasn't the one who packed up the leftovers. Oh right. That was me, she said, unsure what to do. If she spent too much time with Zach, she might want to kiss him again. Who was she kidding? She already wanted to kiss him again. Her lips were traitors. They longed to feel Zach's lips against them, and she wanted to run the other way. Instead, she sat down next to him, taking the fork he offered. It was good the first time around. He took a bite of the meal. It's good reheated, too. Why didn't you eat it the first time? She asked. He shrugged. I wasn't hungry then. She saw it for the lie it was. He'd wanted to get away from her. Now he was sitting next to her, even closer than when they'd been at the table. Their knees kept bumping into each other. He put his fork in the air. I think I have cake. We could eat that next. To her, he looked like a small child, the way he was excited about the possibility of cake. She might die if she watched him eat it again. I've had enough cake. Take some potatoes. I won't eat all of this. Did you pack 2 meals in here? She laughed. No, just one. At least that's all I asked for. Thank you for thinking of me, he said. She shrugged, not knowing where the sense of responsibility she'd felt in that moment came from. It had seemed like the right thing to do. She hadn't done it to make him this happy, but she had. She didn't have feelings for Zach, but maybe she was just being a decent human being. Right now she wished he'd put on a shirt because she could stop staring at the hair on his chest. She put down her fork. What did my father say to you? He set his fork down on the counter. He thinks I'm up to something. Have you talked to him? Not since you told me not to. He doesn't know the engagement is fake. He seemed pretty sure that I was doing something wrong. I don't know what you want me to say. He doesn't know. Zach studied her. Okay. He rose and took the empty plate with him. After searching in the refrigerator, he pulled out a cupcake on a plate. No cake, but I do have this. She shook her head. I'm good. Come on. It's from one of those cupcake places that was on TV, he said. You checked it out? They rent a storefront in one of my buildings. He said it so casually. Do you remember every tenant? He laughed. Only the ones who give me food. He sat back down. I always get icing on my face. Here. She held out her hand. I'll show you how to do it. He slid the plate her way. She broke off the bottom then put it on the top, making a sandwich. Zach looked at it. I've never seen anyone do that. Learn something new every day. He bit into the cupcake. That's much better. Thanks. He licked his fingers and she couldn't tear away her gaze. It was sexy and he didn't even mean it to be. Her mouth went dry watching him. I'm sorry about earlier, he said. Him licking his fingers was so mesmerizing that it took her a minute to remember what he was talking about. Oh, honest mistake. She'd thrown herself at him. What else was he supposed to think? I did think you were feeling something. I'll always respect your boundaries. She didn't want any. Kiss me now was all she could think. He'd taste of chocolate icing and vanilla cake. It would be the best combination of flavors in the history of food. Well, it's over. I'll stay sober and we'll be fine. She picked up his plate and brought it to the sink. Do you ever work from home? He blinked at her. Not very often. Why? Just curious. You never gave me a tour of the place. His eyes narrowed. Was she being too obvious about wanting to see his office? It doesn't have to happen tonight. An eyebrow went up on Zach's face. I tread carefully, Brandi. I already know what you are up to. The bargain might get worse for you if I find you snooping around again. Chapter 17. Zach refocusing. When Zach woke the next morning, he was determined to get their bargain back on track. He tucked away any feelings that he may have and rose to begin his day. His heart would remain his own and he wouldn't give it away to any woman, let alone Brandi Marsing. She represented even more of a threat than most because she'd been sent to spy on him. Thinking they were in a real relationship would not only crush his soul but his company also. He could handle the former but not the latter. He'd spent too much time and energy building his empire to have it taken down by one sexy woman. Brandi without inhibitions would be fun. He could spend time and break down those walls she'd erected, but for what purpose? She was going to go back to her life when this was over. They weren't real. She wasn't going to marry him and that was okay. Marriage wasn't in his plans because then he'd have to take time away from his company. Since he wasn't looking for a bride, having fun with Brandi wouldn't hinder anything. He had paperwork to look over on the way into work so he didn't have to talk to Brandi. She didn't seem willing to have a conversation as she sipped her travel mug of coffee. I need you to check out that house again for me. She turned a surprised look to him. Me? Is there anyone else here? I have a checklist of what has supposedly been done. I'll drop you off and send the driver back to get you after I get to the office. She seemed to mull that over. You're getting rid of me. I'm asking you to do a task as my assistant. You know enough to not botch this up, Brandi. And I can't be in two places at once. She frowned. Fine. I'll do it. It wasn't a request. It was an order. She had no answer for him so he went back to his paperwork. His attention was on her anyway and he read the same paragraph more than once. Frustrated with how her presence affected him, he put the paperwork down. He'd resume when she was out of the car. He handed her a folder for the house, her fingers brushing his, sending sparks up his arm. He cleared his throat to wash away any outward reaction he might have. Here's the list. Mark what has been done and what hasn't been done. There's a number for the contractor at the bottom. Tell him what you found before you get to the office. She looked at the folder in her hand. You're trusting me? Maybe. Could be a trap. You won't know unless you spring it. He glanced out the window. You're here to spy on me. If you were here to sabotage my business, this would be too obvious. I have ways to check what you've done. She nodded but didn't say anything. The driver stopped and Brandi climbed out. Zach rolled down his window. Don't let me down, Brandi. When Zach arrived at the office, he had someone waiting for him. You need coffee before you talk to him? Kendra asked. No. I'll be fine. Fred Caldwell rose as Zach entered his office. They shook hands. Fred. Zach. Did I hear correctly that Brandi Marsing is working for you? Zach motioned for the man to sit. Yes. Apparently, her father sent her to spy on me. That seems obvious, Fred said. I thought so too. I found out pretty quickly that my suspicions were correct. Yet she's still here. Not that I want to tell you how to run your business. Fred was former law enforcement. We've been friends a long time and I trust you, but yes, this is my business to run. You need me to run a background check on her? No. I know all I need to know about Brandi Marsing. Tell me what you've learned about Kent Marsing. Fred laughed. He isn't happy about you being engaged to his daughter. Good. I want him uncomfortable in every aspect of his life, Zach said. It was time to bring down the Marsing empire. They'd ruled the building world with threats and intimidation for long enough. Zach didn't mind competition if it was fair. Involving organized crime in your business didn't keep the playing field level for anyone. Zach had built his business by doing honest work. Good work even, but Marsing was a thorn in his side that he was ready to extricate. He's also using the Mafia more and more. I think he's got so many debts to them that his grandchildren won't be able to pay them back. Zach leaned back in his chair, eyeing Fred. That's bad. All he could think about was the backlash for Brandi. If she knew, then she would go to jail. If she didn't know, then she would have the Mafia on her tail for the rest of her life. They wouldn't believe that she didn't know what her father was doing. The Justice Department might not believe it either. She'd be collateral damage no matter who went after her. Zach unwittingly was protecting her. He didn't mind that. He still had his trump card to play. He caught her spying. It didn't matter how it all panned out, Zach was safe. He's made a few bad deals and has had to borrow money from them, Fred said. How do you know all this? I see most of the books. He doesn't let any one of us see it all, but I was able to cobble together what I think is an accurate picture. You know what's going on, Zach said. He'd planted Fred in Marsing's organization more than a year ago, after a newer real estate company had gone under because of Marsing's dirty dealings. Zach wasn't afraid of competition. Marsing was. Tell me more, Zach said. The books don't look good. He's hemorrhaging money, and the word is the Mafia is getting impatient for him to make some kind of profit. That would be why he sent Brandi to spy on me. I'm his biggest competition. How much of a role in Marsing's organization does Brandi have? Forewarned was forearmed, and if Brandi was in deeper, then he might have to limit what she saw of his empire even more. She only scratches the surface. She gives him advice which he doesn't take. There are fights sometimes that everyone can hear. Zach rubbed his chin. She's a smart woman. Him not realizing that could be one way he'll be brought down. It's why he hasn't been as successful as he could be, in my opinion. Are they close? He didn't need to know that for his business, but he was curious. She seeks his approval and he never gives it. No wonder Brandi lights up whenever he compliments her. Then again, he could manipulate the situation knowing this. He felt like a cad for thinking it, but she was a mole sent to spy on him. She knew that when she entered his office, so she wasn't completely innocent in all of this. Well, thanks for coming in, Fred. Keep me updated if anything huge goes down. Zach's phone dinged. My driver is on his way back with Brandi. You better get out of here. She's pretty loyal to her father, Fred said as he rose. Fred? Does she know that her father is dirty? The man across from him frowned. No, I actually don't think she has any idea that her father is in bed with the mob. Chapter 18, The Ring. Brandi returned to the office with all of the information that Zach needed. She handed him her tablet where she'd taken notes. As he looked at it, he smiled. Thanks. This is great. Even more than I asked for. She settled on the chair opposite him, a little relieved. Of course she could do this, but to have positive feedback helped. Good. Your secret meeting went well. He glanced at her over the tablet. Yes, it did. Does it pertain to what I'm doing? That eyebrow went up briefly. No. Something else I'm working on. More personal. Well, I am your fiancé. Yes, but we know that's just a ruse, so don't push it, Brandi. He was right, but she was in a mood. She'd been sent on an errand to get her out of his hair. She didn't like the feeling of being dismissed. She watched as he typed something on his laptop. What's next? I have to send the list to Kendra, so she can call these contractors to get this done. You and I have a date. Date? She studied him, his long fingers moving over the keys. Just a minute. When he was finished, he turned to her. We need to get you a ring. I can't have you going around without one. It'll cement the idea that this is a true engagement. I'm not sure that's necessary. I could say that I don't wear it at work since I'm on job sites. He shook his head, his jaw set. No, we do this properly. He rose as if the discussion were over. He stood by her chair, his hand extended. Now. Yes. Are any stores open right now? It's early. One will open for me. That statement said so much. It showed the power that Zach could yield. Where are we going? Tiffany's. Her mouth went dry. Zach was going all out for this charade. That's the most expensive place to get a ring. Yes, and I want the best for the woman I'm going to marry. The fact that it sounded like a good idea to marry him should have sent a chill down her spine. Maybe she was taking this bargain too seriously. She might need some time away from Zach, but then she wouldn't accomplish her task of taking him down. What she'd seen of him made her like him more and more. He wasn't even being intentionally charming, just himself. She rose without his help. Okay. It's your money. When they arrived at Tiffany's, the place was dark. Zach's driver parked in the alley behind. Sorry for the back entrance. She waved off his apology. She'd been in Tiffany's before, but never when they weren't open. Her father had bought her a necklace for her when she turned 18. He'd let her pick it out and she'd felt like an adult. A woman with black hair pulled back into a bun opened the back door. Mr. Wilder. Brandi wondered how many women Zach had brought here, but she doubted he had done this with anyone else. Madge, thanks for opening. Anything for you, Mr. Wilder. The woman led them into the front of the store, turning on lights as she went. I've pulled some things out based on your parameters, but you know anything in the store is open for your perusal. Zach nodded. Thank you, Madge. I do have something specific in mind, but whatever my bride wants is okay with me. Brandi glanced at him and he gave no indication that he was kidding. He took her hand. Madge, this is Brandi, the woman who captured my heart. He sounded sincere when he said it. When she did marry, she wanted that person to speak of her how Zach did. He had a warmth in his voice, an affection that she knew he didn't feel. Whoever he did marry would be one lucky woman because he put as much effort into the marriage as he did his business. Madge took both of Brandi's hands in hers. It's so lovely to meet you. Thank you. Lovely to meet you too. Madge dropped her hands then gestured to the store. Over here I have selected a few items. Let's look at those first. Zach put a hand on her lower back, guiding her to where Madge indicated. The warmth from his hand enveloped her as she let herself be moved. She let out a gasp. In front of her was a tray of exquisite rings, none of them garish. She'd only thought of having an engagement ring briefly. Her attention had always been on her father's business. Being the daughter of a rich man, she had to be careful who she spent time with and hadn't dated often. She didn't trust most men, but she did Zach because his motives were clear. Zach picked up a ring with a princess-cut diamond and several smaller purple stones around the main one. This jumped out at me. What do you think, honey? Are those rubies? Brandi asked as Zach slid it onto her finger. No, purple diamonds. They go well with your color. I've never thought a redhead should refrain from wearing purple. The ring is striking on you. Brandi looked at the ring at arm's length and a smile moved her cheeks. Wow. You don't have to pick the first one, honey, Zach said. She could get used to him calling her that. She sighed trying to remember that this was just playing. None of this was real even if it felt like it was. I really like this one. If it's what you want, then it's what you'll have, Zach said. We'll take it. Brandi couldn't take her eyes off of the ring. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever worn. It even put to shame that dress that Zach had bought her. May took Brandi's hand in hers. It's the right size. No need to do anything to it. I guess it was meant to be, Zach said. This is the one, Brandi? Yes, this is the one. Did you want to pick out the wedding rings also? Madge asked. Brandi looked at Zach. He shouldn't go that far with this charade. Well, we're still in negotiations about those rings, so we should wait. We do have ones that match that ring, but they'll be here when you are ready, Madge said. Thank you, Madge. He pulled out his credit card, a platinum version. You can put it on this. Brandi had no words, but when Madge walked away she found them. This is really expensive. I'll insure it in case you lose it before we can return it. I'll still get my money back. She laughed. Of course you will. His practicality didn't dampen the moment. She was engaged in name only, but with a ring it was harder to feel as if was pretend. It seemed real right now, but she'd give the ring back in 3 months. Do you like it? Zach asked. When she looked up at him, his gaze was on her, so it wasn't a throwaway question. Yes, I do. Was it what you dreamed of? He asked. Dreamed of? She asked, not sure what he meant. Doesn't every little girl dream of what their engagement ring will look like, and what they'll wear on their wedding day? I guess I wasn't ever so whimsical. His gaze shuddered. That's a shame. Everyone should have dreams. Was yours to run a real estate empire? He laughed. Once I met your father, yes. Earlier on I wanted to be a rodeo clown. Brandi snorted. A clown? I found out that I wasn't funny and I had a knack for finding buildings that would make me money. It was a clear choice. You could always go back when you retire and try it, she said. He shook his head as Madge came back. I doubt I'd ever retire. Madge handed him his credit card. Congratulations, you two. I hope you have a long and happy life. Thanks, Madge, Zach said. Brandi tore her gaze away from her ring. The ring since it wasn't really hers. Thanks, Madge. How did he ask you? I need to know. There will be many broken hearts now that Zachary Wilder is off the market. Brandi froze. They hadn't concocted a story yet. Zach saved her. I took her on a picnic and the ring was in her champagne glass. What a great story, and so much better than what Brandi could have thought up on the fly. It was the most romantic picnic on a deserted beach. Madge clapped her hands together. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing it with me. We'll get out of your hair now, Madge. Thanks for your time. Zach escorted Brandi out the back door. Thanks for the save, Zach. He shrugged. I'm used to thinking on my... Chapter 19, Getting Reacquainted. Brandi stared at the ring that Zach had bought her. Rented more like, since she had to give it back at the end of their deal. Kendra had raved about how beautiful it was. Most of her girlfriends were too busy with their new families. So it was nice to have a woman to share this with. Even if she knew it was all temporary. Since she was still determined to bring him down, it would happen. Her snooping just had to be more discreet. When she looked up, Zach was standing in his doorway. He had an odd look on his face. Everything okay? Yes. Would you like to go to dinner? A date? We are engaged, so yes. I made reservations at Toscana. You were able to get us a table? He shrugged. Of course. Zach, I've never been there. You must have some pull. I helped the owner's daughter get a condo that she wanted. Is there no end to the favors you've done? She asked. It's good business, that's all. I'm known as cutthroat, but it's because I don't take any crap from anyone. Not because I'm a jerk. She blinked. Are you ready now? I am if you are. Let me freshen my makeup and I'll be ready. No need. You're already beautiful. Her breath left her body at his compliment. It was probably just an offhand one and she shouldn't take it to heart. She turned away from his as a smile erupted on her face. Well, I still want to make sure I don't have lipstick on my teeth. Do we have 5 minutes? Go ahead, Brandi. She used the time in the bathroom to give herself a pep talk as she found herself getting closer and closer to Zach. She liked him more and more each day, and a part of her wondered if there was truly a dark side to him. What if she was looking for something that wasn't there? Staring into the mirror, she shook her head. I don't think that Dad could have been that wrong about Zach. I just have to dig deeper. I also have to find more things not to like about him. That should make it all easier when I expose him. With her mission once again at the forefront of her mind and her heart safely tucked away, she left the bathroom. Zach waited by the elevator, his ankles crossed and his head bent over his phone. He tucked that away when she stopped in front of him, then held out his hand. No one's around, she said. What little security I have monitors the elevators. She nodded and took his hand. Toscana was hopping when they arrived. They gave you a reservation? He leaned down in the lobby and put his mouth by her ear. I always get what I want. A shiver went through Brandi. What did Zach want exactly? The hostess led them to a table in a corner. It was a place to see and be seen. Brandi had mixed feelings about this. She was on display and that was good for their bargain, but someone could also report back to her father. Would he still trust her if he thought she was falling in love with Zach Wilder? She wasn't, but she did like him more than she expected to. I know you drink champagne, but do you like wine? Zach asked. Red mostly. Then I know what to order, he said. When the waitress came by, he pointed to something on the wine menu. This Brunello. The 2015 if you have it. It must have been expensive as the waitress's eyes bugged out. Sure. She left to retrieve the wine. Brandi leaned closer to Zach. She's already calculating her tip. He chuckled. She must be new. I don't recognize her and she should already know I'm a good tipper. Not everyone is, Brandi said. He shrugged. I understand what it is to work for a living. Brandi went back to her menu and picked something. The waitress returned with the wine and after opening it she poured some into his glass. He swirled it and then sipped. Okay. He handed the glass for Brandi to sip. She loved how the flavors danced across her tongue. Fruity. Italian wines usually are, but they go great with anything on the menu, he said. Turning back to the waitress he smiled. That's great. Thanks. She took their food orders and left them. Zach reached across the table and intertwined their fingers. How was your day? You were there for most of it. He laughed. Yes, but are you learning anything? She studied him. She was learning a lot about Zachary Wilder, but not that much about what she needed to learn about his business. You have a different take on things than my father. You also listen to my opinion more. Was that disloyal to her father? It wasn't a lie. She'd only said it because she'd gotten comfortable with Zach, and it seemed as if she could say anything to him. He cocked his head, his gaze on her as if she were the only woman in the room. She could get used to that, but she shouldn't. You have a good brain, Brandi. Don't let anyone convince you differently. You're smart and you learn quickly. Your father should appreciate that. Zach had left her speechless, so she sipped her wine. Thank you. I mean it, Brandi. I don't know what part of your story is a lie, but you might as well use this time with me to gain as much as you can. I think your father's company could ultimately benefit from it. You would help me help my father? I'm not afraid of competition, Brandi, and I think your father has other problems that he won't be able to overcome. Like what? He frowned. I spoke out of turn. It isn't my business to tell your father how to run his. I just see a daughter whose talents he isn't taking full advantage of. Brandi had always thought that too, but she'd never had the guts to stand up to him. Their food came and the conversation turned to lighter topics. By the end of the night, they'd finished the bottle and then had some grappa brandy to complete the night. Brandi had a warmth inside of her and she leaned against Zach as they waited for his driver. She snuggled against him in the car, mindful of not throwing herself at him as she had the other night. That was a great meal. Thank you. You're welcome. It was enjoyable to share it with you. She looked up at him, but his expression gave nothing away. I'd like you to kiss me. Brandi. No. We've been through this. As much as I'd like to kiss you, I won't if you've been drinking. I'm not that kind of guy. You're a good man, Zachary Wilder. He smiled down at her. You're a beautiful and sexy woman, Brandi Marsing, but if you come to my bed it will be willingly. Not because your inhibitions are lowered. It's a firm rule for me. That makes you even sexier. She snuggled closer to him and he put his arm around her. Are you cold? Not at all. You're a furnace. He laughed. I've just had an amazing meal. It was wonderful. I've never had grappa before. It is a digestive, to help you digest your food. I hope so. There was a lot of it. You didn't have to eat it all. She chuckled. I couldn't help myself. The driver stopped in the parking garage. Do you need anything else, Mr. Wilder? No, I'm done for the night, Zach said as they traversed to the penthouse elevator. Brandi was a little unsteady, so she clung to Zach. At least that was her excuse. When the elevator door closed, she went up on her tiptoes in front of him. I still want to kiss you for that meal. His lidded eyes looked down at her. No, Brandi. He smiled. As luscious as you look with your face warm from wine and the sated look on your face, I won't kiss you. She frowned. Okay, but I think you need to tuck me in. Deal. He led her to her room. She flopped on the bed. He took off her shoes, rubbing her feet a little as he did it. You want help with your suit? Her eyes popped open. You'd undress me? Chapter 20. Zach rethinks the bargain. If that's what you need me to do, but I have a lot of discipline. I can see you naked and not do anything, said Zach as he stood by her bed. She shook her head. But I can't, so thanks for tucking me in, but I'll finish this. He was right and she shouldn't have sex with him when she was drunk. He kissed her forehead and left her in bed. Alone. A few minutes later, Zach stood in the doorway as his eyes adjusted to the darkness. He could see Brandi shifting, then settling under the covers. She hadn't taken off her suit, but she'd probably do that eventually. He just wanted to check on her. You're still there, she said. Sorry. I was just making sure that you're okay, he said. I am. She sat up. I need to take off my jacket. She did, then snuggled under the covers. Made Zach smile. When he heard her light snores, he closed the door and went to his office. Turning on the lamp on the desk, he then spun his chair to look out over the city. He was attracted to Brandi. That wasn't in question. What should he do with that attraction was the question. She only seemed to want him when she was drunk, which meant she had inhibitions about being with him. She did want him, but their situation was holding her back. Maybe that was a good thing. Things could get complicated for them when the 3 months were done. He fished his phone out of his pocket and called Denny. Hey, he answered. Did I wake you? No, I just get the baby back to bed, he said. Domestic life. Zach couldn't see himself there. Would he ever want children? Not at the pace he currently worked. He liked what he did and couldn't imagine others making demands on his time. That's why he had a black book of women who would warm his bed and not expect breakfast. Things were much easier that way. Brandi wasn't easy that way. She'd want some kind of commitment. She'd want to build a life, and she deserved to do that with someone else. Not him. Hey. Sorry. No, you didn't wake her up.
No.
What's going on? You don't often call me late at night. I know. Sorry again. What's going on, Zach? This situation with Brandi is getting complicated. Denny laughed. I knew it would. Why? This is a simple business arrangement. I've made thousands of them over the years. Very few of them involved a beautiful woman. Was that the problem? That a woman who had no idea how gorgeous she was currently slept in his guest's bedroom? She'd invaded his personal life on his encouraging. On his insistence, really, she was sleeping under his roof. Had that been a tactical error on his part? He'd wanted to make sure that she didn't let on to her father what was actually going on. That's true, but why am I having trouble keeping this woman at arm's length? I know you didn't think that this would happen to you, but it's personal now. There is a woman who is challenging you and you can't brush her off. He rubbed his chin with his hand scraping across whiskers. He didn't want to admit that Denny was correct. If that's true, why didn't I see it? You were probably impulsive, which is pretty rare for you, Denny said. Impulsive. That wasn't his usual way of dealing with anything, but he couldn't pass up the opportunity that had presented itself to him. He had to bring down Kent Marsing once and for all. The building world would be better for it. Newer companies could succeed. New blood and new ways of doing things were always welcome in Zach's mind. Just because you'd done something the same way forever didn't make it the right way to do it. Growth and change were important to any industry. That isn't like you at all, Zach. I've been pondering your situation since you told me about it, and I think you're in dangerous territory. Why? Zach was uncomfortable with the feelings that Brandi was bringing out in him. He also wanted to know what Denny thought. An outsider's opinion wasn't something Zach sought very often. He was usually sure of his decisions. This situation with Brandi was giving him fits, something he wasn't used to. Because I think you've finally met your match? Match? How so? Brandi challenges you, as I said before. She isn't going to be put into some neat box. She isn't going to let you define when she gets your attention like those women in your contacts. Zach thought about those women. None of them were memorable. He didn't give any of them a second thought after they left in the middle of the night. He'd make sure they had a ride home, but that was the extent of the brainpower he used on them. Brandi had been entering his thoughts in his every waking moment. That was just not acceptable. Denny went on. She's more to you than just a business deal. What exactly are you saying? That you are having feelings for Brandi and you don't do feelings. How did Denny know him so well? I may be. I hate to admit it, Denny, but she is getting under my skin. You hate that, I know. It isn't your style, Zach, but it had to happen at some point. Why? Why can't I go on with my life how it was? Because Brandi Marsing is the one. No, don't even think that, Denny. I'm not the marrying type. I'm not going to have kids and a picket fence. None of that is in my future. You can deny it all you want, but some form of commitment is heading your way. How do I stop it? Denny chuckled. I don't think you can, but for you to get a handle on it and slow it all down you need a contract. You're a lawyer. Of course you think that. How will that help? If you lay out the ground rules clearly, then you both have to abide by them. You are more likely to keep your heart in check, and not give it away. You're cold sometimes. I'm being your lawyer, not your friend right now, Denny said. Zach put his feet on his desk, pondering what Denny was suggesting. A contract. To lay out exactly what can and can't happen between us. He could see the merit of that. It would define and restrict both of their behaviors. I like it, Denny. Let me think about some stipulations and I'll email them to you. You are going to embrace this? Yes, Denny. I need to keep my heart where it belongs and not give it to my rival's daughter. I agree, sort of. If Brandi were anyone else but Kent Marsing's daughter, I think you'd be fine, but that way goes foolishness. Zach laughed. He was enjoying the idea of this contract more and more. You know I'm a stickler for details, so if I write it into the contract then I'll keep to it. And Brandi can't tempt me. I don't know about that, but I think it's a way to keep your SS covered. Right now she could walk out at any time. Yes, she might go to jail, but Marsing's got some high-powered lawyers. Dirty lawyers, he said. Yes, dirty, but that makes them more dangerous. They would get her out and then you'd have no way of bringing him down. Denny didn't know about Fred and Zach wasn't going to tell him. He was giving his friend plausible deniability if it was necessary. Right. This is good, Denny. Let me go and I'll get you the list of behaviors and other parameters for our bargain. And I'll write up my bill. Chapter 21, The Contract. Brandi woke up with a groan. Her head throbbed and her mouth was dry. Once again she'd had too much to drink. She needed to stop that. She thought back to her night. At least she hadn't been as brazen as after the gala and thrown herself at Zach. He was turning out to be a gentleman. She rolled over and the room took a quick spin. Yikes. She sat up slowly but everything remained steady. She felt the soft knock on her bedroom door in her head. Another groan escaped her. Brandi. Zach. She looked down at herself. Somewhere in the night, she'd changed out of her work clothes and into pajamas. She was decent enough, but she pulled the covers up to her neck. Come in. You okay?
No.
He flashed a smile. I thought not. Here's some water and aspirin. She swallowed the aspirin and drank the whole glass of water. Why did I drink so much? You didn't drink that much. You're just not used to it, he said. I never get drunk, Zach, and I've done it twice in your presence. It's kind of embarrassing. No worries. I'm not judging. You hungry? I'm not sure I can eat anything. Wait, shouldn't we be at work? I'm the boss. I get to make the rules. We'll go in when you're feeling better. She eyed him, but he wasn't kidding. You could go in without me. No. It'll be fine, Brandi. Come eat some toast at least. She shook her head, but that hurt. No. I want to sleep. He held out his hand and that's when she noticed he wasn't in a suit. He wore jeans and a button-down shirt. She'd never seen him in anything but business attire. He filled out his jeans well and she had to avert her gaze or she'd check out his package. A lesser woman might have blushed and she still might. Eat. Then you can go back to sleep. She studied his face for a moment then took his hand. It was warm and a little calloused. He was a man who rolled up his sleeves and got to work. He wasn't afraid of getting dirty, which reminded her that she was here to find dirt on him. She shouldn't be swayed by his charm. Okay. She sat at the breakfast bar where they'd shared a late-night meal. Zach moved around the kitchen like a panther again, sleek and predatory even though he was only making toast. Tea. Do you have green? Yes. I had my housekeeper buy some. How thoughtful. Why did Zach have to be this way? She wanted him to be an ogre with body odor. Instead he smelled masculine, musky, inviting. This was all going to be harder when she brought him down. She was beginning to like him not just as a person but as a man. Now she had to truly guard her heart against him. He set a mug of tea in front of her that she grasped with both hands in order to ground herself. She was on a mission. Playing house with Zach hadn't been expected. The fact that he was truly a nice guy floored her. He wasn't fake as far as she could tell. A few minutes later, Zach set a plate of toast in front of her. He leaned his butt on the counter behind him. I had Kendra move our appointments to another day so we don't have to go in. I have some work in my office but you can sleep if you need to. You did all that for me? He shrugged a wry grin on his face. I was the one who talked you into the grappa. It wasn't difficult. I'd never had it before. I think your father needed to expose you to more culture. She dropped her toast on the plate. I've gone out to dinner. I learned that at an early age. Has he taken you to Europe? To art museums? To the ballet? She couldn't remember anything like that. I've taken ballet. Not exactly the same thing. Zach put up his hands. Sorry. I don't mean to criticize your father. She shrugged and nibbled on some more toast. It's okay. No, it's not, but we can talk about something else. How are you feeling? Human again. Thanks. More toast. No, let me see how it settles in my stomach. Are you okay to talk business? She cocked her head. What kind of business? He pointed to both of them. This bargain between us. I think we need to have a contract. She thought about that but couldn't come up with a reason not to do it. Okay, we can talk about that. Let me get some paper and I'll be back. He returned with a legal pad and a pen settling on the chair next to her. She resisted the urge to lean in and bask in whatever that fragrance was that he wore. Where do we start? She asked. How about we list what our boundaries are? Sure. No kissing unless we are being observed, he said, writing it down. For some reason that disappointed her. She liked kissing Zach even if she knew she shouldn't. Instead of protesting, she nodded. Kissing Zach would get them in trouble, would get her in trouble. No romantic gestures at all unless we are being observed. Define romantic gesture. Making your breakfast could be construed as romantic. He had a point. Well, no displays of affection unless we're in public. So I can cook you breakfast. She laughed. You can certainly make me toast when I'm hungover. You need some more? No, she said. More tea? I made a whole pot. Stop. That's what she wanted to tell him. Stop being sweet and kind and a good guy. He was supposed to be a criminal, and they were only charming if they needed something from you. Thanks. He poured from a teapot that had small flowers on it. Periwinkles. He grimaced. My mother insisted I needed a tea set. Brandi laughed. Mom again. Yeah, Mom again. Okay, back to business. Brandi thought she could banter with Zach all day, but they had to hash out the parameters of this contract. It would save them both heartache in the end. That's where this would head if she didn't get her emotions under control. Her attraction for Zach could go nowhere as he was going to jail. I only wear the ring in public. I don't want a chance losing it. Okay, but you have to remember to put it on when we leave here. This was all fun, but it was also serious. This was going to be a formal arrangement, and she didn't want to sign anything until she was sure what she was doing. She couldn't agree to anything that would limit her ability to snoop. So far he hadn't brought anything up like that. Instead he brought up kissing. Was he having trouble distancing himself from her? Maybe Zach wasn't such a cool cucumber where she was involved. Interesting. That gave her pause. Was this attraction both ways? Why this contract now? He looked up at her, surprise evident on his face. It just seemed appropriate. That wasn't an answer, but she'd take it. Well, let's see what else we can think of, but I'm not signing anything until I'm sure about it. Fair enough, Brandi. Chapter 22. Brandi sees her father. After a day off, Brandi was ready to start her day early. She hadn't signed the contract yet because she realized after hashing it out with Zach, she wanted her father's advice. He wasn't a lawyer, but he'd seen enough contracts in his time to know what would work and what wouldn't. She marched into Zach's office to go over their schedule, or the day. As much as she was looking forward to it, she still needed to see her father first. Zach didn't need to know that. Before you finalize your schedule, I have an errand to run after lunch. Okay, I can drop you somewhere. I'd rather go by myself. Some personal, woman stuff. Zach didn't flinch. Most men strayed away from the mysteries of some of the things women did. Pedicures and periods usually sent a man running for cover. Zach was unperturbed by it. Okay, do what you need to do. I can move the appointment with the business group to an hour later. That'll work. I don't need much time. Sure. They planned their day, and when the time came, Zach dropped her to get her car in the garage of the penthouse. Freedom in a way, not that Zach had ever told her she couldn't leave. She drove to her father's house, knowing he'd been working from home lately. She didn't know why, but he hadn't gone in the office since before she moved in with Zach. She entered the house to see Fred, leaving her father's office. Fred gave her a warm smile. Hey, Brandi. She kissed his cheek. Fred had been a kind shoulder to lean on when her father could be difficult. Hey, how's his mood today? He's always happy to see you. You are very charming, Fred, but I have no delusions that I'm his princess. It was a cold truth she'd learned early on. She still loved her father. He hadn't abandoned her like her mother, and he'd taught her some valuable skills for life. He'll still be happy to see you. Everything going well. Was it? This contract with Zach would be just the thing to keep her heart and attraction for him in check. She nodded. Yes. Good. Glad to hear. She knocked on her father's office door. Come in, he said. Hi, Daddy, she said. He rose from his desk and hugged her. Hey, princess. Sit down. Zach let you out of his sight. She settled. I told him it was a woman thing. He let me go. Most men will. I was counting on that. She didn't tell her father that Zach hadn't flinched. Maybe those things didn't bother him, but he'd be a rare male of his age that it didn't. What do you have to report? Right down to business. That was her father. She frowned. Not anything, Daddy. I haven't looked at his home office yet, but at his regular office there's nothing. Her father studied her. Maybe you're not looking in the right places. A man like that will get sloppy and leave things around. Why? If he's so good at this that it isn't obvious he's a criminal, then why would you think he could get sloppy? Because his ego can't wrap itself around the idea that he'll get caught. He's a mastermind, remember that. Zach had been nothing but kind to her. She could use many adjectives to describe him, but mastermind wasn't one of them. He was smart and fair in all the dealings she'd been involved with. He'd been good to her, taking care of her when she had a hangover. Was he that good an actor? If he was putting in an Oscar-worthy performance for her. What if Zach wasn't dirty? No, she shook away those thoughts. Her father wouldn't be wrong about this. I'll keep that in mind, Daddy. You have to dig further. Do more, Brandi. This is important. I understand that, Daddy. I need more time. The information isn't readily available. It's time to be a grown-up, Brandi. She was being an adult. She was in the lion's den trying to find how to bring him down. She lived and worked with Zach, and no matter how nice he was still the enemy. I don't know what you mean. I'm doing my best. He leaned his elbows on his desktop. That was a sign he was going to say something she didn't like, but he was going to say it anyway. Her father had helped her gain a thick skin. She braced herself. You're going to have to sleep with him. She gasped. Sleep with him? Yes. Men are weak when it comes to pillow talk. They like to brag, and that's when Zach will give up his information. Then all you'll have to do is find evidence to corroborate what he said. She stared at her father, willing him to laugh and tell her he was kidding. He wasn't. The stern look on his face said it all. Daddy. Don't daddy me. The future of our business and family fortune depends on it. She gulped. I thought I was just bringing down a dirty businessman. What's going on? He frowned. I didn't want to tell you this, princess, but I have some debts. Everyone has debts. I have debts that are coming due. If I take over Zach's company, I can pay those debts. She hadn't known they were in such dire straits. Daddy, why didn't you tell me? We could have done some debt consolidation and sold off some properties for cash. There are ways out of this. He put up a hand. It's not that simple. Then explain it to me. Her father wanted her to sleep with the enemy, and she wasn't going to do that unless she knew exactly why. She'd have to take out that clause of her contract with Zach. He'd be suspicious. Crap. You don't need to know everything, Brandi. Just know that I need you to do this. To get this information for me. Anything you can find will help me take over his company. She didn't like that her father was keeping her in the dark. It wasn't anything new, but now that she was more active in helping him, he should share more. Daddy, tell me what's going on. No, Brandi, the less you know the better. Trust me on this. Just do your part. You want me to sleep with him? Really? Your own daughter. Let's not be dramatic about this. It's just sex. Daddy. She rose and wanted to be out of there. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't believe that her father was pimping her out. He had to be desperate, but this was worse than she'd ever suspected from him. Brandi. It's for the good of the company. She rose, thoughts of sharing the contract with her father gone. It had a no-sex clause. She'd insisted on it, and Zach had readily agreed. She looked at her father one more time, then left him in his office. She swiped at tears as she entered her car, sitting for a minute to get herself under control. She was a strong and fierce woman who had never used sex as a weapon. Her father was asking her to sleep with Zach to get information. Like a spy in a cheap novel. How had her life come to this? She shook off all of her feelings and steeled herself. Her father had said it was just sex. That was the problem, wasn't it? It wouldn't be just sex with Zachary Wilder. No, it would be so much more.